needs to support the budget deficit and to part for the future generation. Bring the private sector management to run these companies, partner with the private sector, open the book, on the equity book of some of the companies that we have in our books to international companies, international banks to help us transition into what we need. The digital transformation, the technological transformation, the artificial intelligence transformation that we need in some of those forms. And that's what we want. And we're committed to level the playing field. And once again, our target is actually 75 to 80% private sector share in the investments. And I hope we achieve it prior to that.
Tariff rhetoric causing global uncertainty. How concerned are you about that?
We feel that we're so competitive, an industrial hub for export in a wider region, Egypt, key continents. I can confirm it is an export fund. Our export to GDP is tiny vis-a-vis our potential, only 10%. Our input is around 20%. So what we're doing so far,
that's ambitious.
So more importantly, I go back, sorry, to find it. On the US side, what I'm doing is I am eliminating all the non-tariff barriers.
Beyond trade. And what does the Suez Canal economic zone look like in terms of investment opportunities?
We're pleased with the ceasefire that has been announced, but so far there's still, the ship liners, they need to wait.
You haven't seen an increase in trade?
Not yet, because we're talking weeks or less to that effect, but we're cautiously optimistic. Suez Canal economic zone is a fantastically located. So the last, as I mentioned, 10 years, we've been expanding our ports capacity, efficiency, management.
China trade and the impact that trade war could have on investments in Egypt, given that Chinese investments in the Suez Canal economic zone now exceed what, $3 billion? Are you going to need to decide?
No, again, we're not in a game of choosing a side. We want to attract the right investments. Egypt is ready. The cost advantages of Egypt today, cheaper than any country within that we have. And that's where we want to localize industry. We want to build hubs for industry that can utilize Egypt. Egypt is a major gateway to Africa. It's a continent with a huge potential, and we're working extensively to open through logistical hubs, to have the banking network. We have that embedded. We have the EU partnership. We have the Arab Partnership Agreement. With our partnership agreement on the trade side,
that you are making is cascading down.
We're very conscious about an inclusive growth. It has to be inclusive because that's what we've suffered from before. You need to have that because you have to have a social safety net that really absorb and highest priority of government.
We see the person we know you can become and put you in the center of a path toward a new career. Free.
Like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit, he's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
Outrage from the US president on a weekend had begun with hope. Russia and Ukraine's largest prisoner exchange so far. On Friday, it hinted possible progress towards his peace initiative. Instead, President Vladimir Putin launched Russia's biggest sustained air assault on Ukraine yet, 13 killed by Saturday. 12 dead the next night during Russia's largest air attack yet, 367 drones and missiles, prompting Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to issue this warning, saying the world may go on vacation, but the war continues despite weekends and weekdays. This cannot be ignored. America's silence and the silence of others in the world only encourages Putin. Trump responded Sunday, as he often does, putting Zelensky down, but also aiming rare criticism at Putin, calling him crazy.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like
Putin's response Sunday night, 155 drones, killing 4 people, the largest Russian drone attack since their illegal, unprovoked, full-scale invasion began 39 months ago, Ukraine says.
President Putin.
The Kremlin spokesman saying Putin is making the decisions that are necessary to ensure the security of our country in a situation with emotional overload. A jab at Trump. In Ukraine, as rescuers crunch through bomb-blasted glass, fear is everywhere. My grandparents are in there, a woman screams. Another shouting, my mom and dad are still in there. Putin buys time for war, trading barbs with Trump. His bombs are tearing into the people. Trump says he wants to protect. CNN, London.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado. Senator, good to see you. So you're going to have a chance in the next few weeks to push back against President Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending cut bill. You just heard Senator Johnson lay out his concerns about how it will balloon the debt. Other Republicans like Josh Hawley, Susan Collins say they're not on board with the bill's cuts and changes to Medicaid. Majority Leader John Thune can't afford to lose more than 3 Republican votes. Gives Democrats an opening to stop this legislation. Do Democrats have a strategy?
Well, I think we're going to make sure the American people understand what's in this bill. It is completely incoherent. The Republicans can't agree on what they're trying to do with it. And the cuts to Medicaid are going to be devastating to rural America and to rural Colorado. I've spent a ton of time listening to healthcare providers in red parts of the state that voted for Donald Trump that are not engaged in waste, fraud, and abuse. They're engaged in trying to deliver healthcare on a shoestring as it is. You know, no OB services, none of the things that anybody in the industrialized world expects to have out of their healthcare system as it is. And now Trump and his allies are going to cut Medicaid, and it's going to drive a lot of these providers out of business. It's going to make it impossible for people that live a very long way from Denver to be able to get health care for their kids. And I hope we are able to stop it. But if we can't, if the 53 Republicans in the Senate insist on ramming it through, the American people are going to know who owns this piece of legislation.
So you just heard Speaker Johnson say that I cited the CBO figure that 8 million people are going to be affected by these cuts to Medicaid. And he said those are just the 8 million who should not be on Medicaid. He said it's more than 1 million people who are undocumented immigrants. He said it's able-bodied males who could be working but are not. You say that that's not true, huh?
It's not true. Look, before I was in the Senate, I was a school superintendent. Most of the kids were kids living in poverty. Their parents were working 2 and 3 jobs. The issue is not that they weren't working. It's that even though they were working, they couldn't get their kids out of poverty because our economy hasn't been working well enough for working people and for the middle class. The same is true in the rural communities that I was just talking about that are being served by those hospitals. And by the way, it's not just about Medicaid. I had a conversation the other day just last week with a woman who's graduated from Western in Gunnison, Colorado, who said, I'm going to be off my parents' health insurance in a year. Is it really true that I'm going to have 2 or 3 jobs just for the privilege of paying for health insurance? That is crazy, Jay. And that is the healthcare system that America has today that Trump is going to make worse. Democrats should be figuring out not just how to stop these cuts, but to give the American people a vision for what a modern healthcare system that looks like the rest of the industrialized world would look like for the American people. Because these decisions that we're going to make really do, in the end, it's not about the rhetoric of Speaker Johnson. It's about how it's going to affect people in their daily lives. And I'm sorry to say this bill is going to affect them in a major way.
So you announced
In a
last
negative way.
You announced last month that you're going to run for governor of Colorado, a decision that you say is driven by your frustration with Congress and, frankly, with Democratic leadership. I just wonder, given your party's record low popularity right now, does the Democratic brand help you or hurt you, even in a purple blue state like Colorado?
I don't think nationally the Democratic brand helps very much anyway. I mean, anywhere. If it did, we wouldn't have lost to Donald Trump twice. I know a lot of supporters of mine and friends of mine are furious at Donald Trump. Are furious at people they think aren't standing up enough to Donald Trump. But I'm also furious at the Democratic Party that has lost twice to Trump. Donald Trump could not get appointed to any job in the state of Colorado. He couldn't get hired on, 17, which is our business street here in Denver, Colorado. But he's been sent to Washington twice to blow the place up because, among other things, people are sick of what they see as the self-interested partisanship there. I think they're sick of a Democratic Party who hasn't been able to show how we're going to address an economy where the middle class continues to shrink and where over the last 20 years we've actually lost ground in terms of the achievement of our kids in school. We need to address those things. So I think it's very important for us to stand up against the insanity that Trump represents and the chaos that he represents and show that there's something better. But we should understand that there were a lot of people that voted for him for a reason, and that's because they wanted to blow up Washington, D.C. They're not surprised by his corruption. That's sort of a ratification of who he is. And we need to show people something different. I see no reason why Colorado can't be the best place in America to raise a kid. And that's why I've decided to run for governor here, because it's important to Colorado, but I think it's also important to have that positive vision for our country.
Thank you so much, Senator Bennett. Good to see you, sir. Hope you have a meaningful and peaceful Memorial Day with your family.
You too.
Brian Wilson and Roger Daltrey duet on a new recording of Wilson's Love and Mercy, backed by the Miraculous Love Kids. The nonprofit group began as Afghanistan's only school of music for poverty-stricken girls and young women and continues to support vulnerable children in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Wang Chung Remix. The 80s hitmakers have released the retrospective album Clear Light, Dark Matter, which includes this new spin on Everybody Have Fun Tonight. Wang Chung will be joining Rick Springfield on his I Want My 80s tour, kicking off May 28th in Clearwater, Florida. That's Don Felder doing I Like the Things You Do. The track comes from his just released album, The Vault, 50 Years of Music. The former Eagle is currently on tour with Styx and REO Speedwagon singer Kevin Cronin. In Hollywood, I'm Rick Damigella.
This is my best seller and it's our most basic product, right?
Okay.
So this currently retails for $33.50, which is a very average price for a product like this. Now, when I launched the business, I tried to make it in America. And let me just say on behalf of all business owners in America, if we could make our stuff here, we absolutely would. My business would be so much easier if I could just make stuff here, right? But it's about math, Jake, and it's not about patriotism or loving your country. Like you said, I was actually a Marine. I served 3 combat tours overseas. I love my country. It's not about patriotism. It's about math. And the math doesn't add up. So if you try to make this product in the United States, it implies a break-even price for me, an MSRP of $114.29. And so what I want your viewers to understand is it's not a question of, hey, make it in America and charge a couple bucks more. The difference between $33.50 and $114.29 is huge. And it also highlights a fundamental truth that doesn't get talked about enough. And that's why tariffs don't work when it comes to at least reshoring jobs. You can take this product that's made overseas and slap a tax on it and raise the price and make it more expensive. But what a tariff doesn't do is bring down the domestic cost of production. As long as the domestic cost of production still implies a price of $114, I'm not going to sell any dog harnesses and I'm going to go out of business.
What did you make of this Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark media rivalry?
I think one, I actually like it, to be quite honest. Here's why, because all sports have it. Every sport, every men's sport, every women's sport should have it. But it gets to a point where it's dangerous, you know, when you have people speak about them in an unpleasant way. Like I just think that what just took place, both young ladies said it was a basketball play. Let's move on. Everybody else has all these think pieces on how they think these young ladies feel against each other. And it's not so. Even if it was, they're not showing it. So why should all these think pieces think they actually know when they just started watching women's basketball? But I would say this, they're talking about it because it gets them more clicks. They're talking, it gets them more views. So I like it in the sense of we're being talked about. We're going to get to the other good stuff because they're going to want more and more of Caitlin Clark, more and more of Angel Reese. That means more and more women's basketball. So we win either way. As long as we're controlling that narrative, I think it's best for women's basketball.
Today's technology reaches far and moves fast, and so do you. With the ability to stay connected wherever you are, and the skills to navigate a world that never stays still, information and technology are just second nature. WGU's IT and cybersecurity programs and certifications bridge the gap between you and the in-demand skills you need. At any and every speed, your career is within reach. Today's technology reaches far and moves fast, and so do you. With the ability to stay connected wherever you are, and the skills to navigate a world that never stays still, information and technology are just second nature. WGU's IT and cybersecurity programs and certifications bridge the gap between you and the in-demand skills you need. At any and every speed, your career is within reach.
Ryan Kelly joins me now. He's the founder of the travel website, The Points Guy, which I go to website all the time to get advice from you, Brian. Good to have you on. I wonder, this has been a busy Memorial Day weekend, but do you see in the data you watch that there has been some lowering of travel demand because it's been certainly been a lowering of consumer confidence, and oftentimes people cut back on travel spending?
Yeah, everything we're seeing is that we're going to set records. Thursday was the 4th busiest day ever in the history of the TSA, and more people are driving as well. I think if there's one trend we're seeing for sure, people still want to travel, but they're staying closer to home. 60% of Americans are, worried about the economy, tariffs. So I think people are waiting to book and stay much more domestic.
I see. So they'll drive instead of fly. Cost you less than buying a bunch of airline tickets. I wonder, does that give opportunity for folks, right? I mean, does that lead to some deals out there?
Absolutely. Actually, airfare across the board. So people are traveling quite a bit. Airports are crowded, but the airlines have had to reduce fares. On average, about an 8% year-over-year reduction in airfare. And we're seeing less demand internationally. So while the airports are busy, this year versus last, there's much more domestic travel. But there are definitely still deals out there. And just remember, the US dollar is still really strong. So we're seeing round trip to New York to London consistently all summer under $600.
Yeah, a lot of folks go to Japan too,
Some
right?
of the biggest destinations.
Yeah, because that difference.
Yeah, Asia's still really high. We're not seeing as many deals to Asia, but Europe for sure. And I recommend to everyone use Google Flights. It's a free tool. And they have an Explore feature where you can put in your home city and then put in Europe. So you can reverse engineer, and that's how you find the cheapest airfare.
About these most recent comments from the Kremlin and sort of back and forth from the White House and Ukrainian officials and Russia as well.
Kremlin is keeping a very outwardly calm exterior on this. Dmitry Peskov would not be drawn on the absolutely crazy comment from Trump when asked about this on Monday rather. So take a listen to how he worded it.
Of course, at the same time, this is a very crucial moment, which is associated, of course, with the emotional overload of everyone, absolutely, and with emotional reactions. We follow this very closely.
Well, and again, we've heard from Dmitry Peskov in another call with journalists this morning, and he said, look, the United States and Russia cannot agree on everything. He said there will always be certain differences, but he said there's a political will to continue working together. And I think we see, look, a real level of confidence from Russia in this statement, because look, we have seen repeatedly in recent weeks that Trump's frustration with Russia has bubbled over, that he's, had these angry Truth Social posts directed at Vladimir Putin, but the US hasn't actually done anything yet to get tougher on Russia. Marco Rubio was grilled about this on Capitol Hill last week, and he continued to maintain that the Trump administration's position is that not imposing further sanctions while sort of holding them over Russia is the best way to keep Russia coming to the table. Plus the fact that in that very same Truth Social post where President Trump called Putin absolutely crazy, he also criticized President Zelensky, saying everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. So I think the Kremlin may be holding out some hope that relationship, the breakdown of which, of course, led to the temporary suspension of US military aid to Ukraine in March, might still be on unsteady ground. And I think, look, as to the question as to whether Putin actually wants peace, ground shows only escalation. Russia has now fired around 9,000 drones at Ukraine since Ukraine signed on to that US-led ceasefire proposal on March 11th. Nights like we saw over the weekend with more than 300 drones, they would have been unthinkable a year ago. So there's a significant escalation when it comes to the air war. And on the front lines as well, we see Russia setting its sights on regions that until very recently would not have been seen as a priority, like Sumy, where we saw Putin last week say that he wanted to create a buffer zone there. So look, they do still want to engage with the US. I think that's clear from Dmitry Peskov's comments this morning, but they are doing only just enough, I think, to keep Trump from sanctioning Russia further, and meanwhile continuing to pursue, as they put it, their goals in Ukraine.
President Trump's big, beautiful bill, it is now headed to the U.S. Senate after narrowly passing in the House just last week. But the sweeping tax and domestic bill policy is already facing some pushback from some Senate Republicans, some concerned about the potential impacts on the national debts, the changes to Medicaid, and the tax credit levels. Trump has already acknowledged that fairly significant changes could be coming.
I think the Senate is going to get there. I hope they're going to get there. I think they're going to have changes. Some will be minor and some will be, fairly significant. But we've been working with the House all the way up. They've been working together. And the Speaker has been working with the leader of the Senate. And, they've done a great job.
Jen Sullivan breaks down what's in the bill and the challenges that it faces in the Republican-led Senate.
The Republican-led House narrowly passing a spending bill Thursday. This legislation could be modified by the Senate. President Donald Trump calling it the Big Beautiful Bill, which focuses on slashing taxes and federal spending.
We're cutting over $1.5 trillion in federal spending.
One potential problem, increased debt. The Congressional Budget Office says the legislation would add another $3.8 trillion to the already huge U.S. debt. Fiscally conservative Republicans in the Senate aren't happy about that, and Democrats argue tax cuts would go largely to the rich.
The GOP tax scam represents an assault on the economy.
The bill passed by the House would mean deep cuts to programs like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which provides food stamps for roughly 42 million Americans. The Congressional Budget Office's recent analysis of the bill found it would strip roughly 3.2 million people of their food stamp benefits in an average month over the next decade. Some Republicans think it doesn't slash spending enough and want to see further cuts.
The first goal of our budget reconciliation process should be to reduce the deficit,
while Democrats worry these cuts will only hurt already struggling Americans.
Democrats should be figuring out not just how to stop these cuts, but to give the American people a vision for what a modern healthcare system that looks like the rest of the industrialized world would look like for the American people.
President Trump has said he would like the legislation to clear the Senate by July 4th, but that may be optimistic. I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
We see the person we know you can become and put you in the center of a path toward a new career by bringing affordable education to you. Materials and tests from wherever you are. We mentor you through every step of your acceleration to reach the momentum of the future that you define. Free at wgu.edu.
Family, friends, and supporters of George Floyd are remembering his life and legacy 5 years after he was killed by a white police officer while being detained. 46-year-old Floyd was pleading that he couldn't breathe while a Minneapolis police officer knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes. He was pronounced dead a little later. Crowds gathered Sunday in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at a memorial marking the site where he died. His death sparked widespread protests around the world in 2020. While attending an anniversary event at Floyd's gravesite in Texas, civil rights activists vowed to keep fighting for racial justice.
Police reform and justice for the George Floyds of the world will not be trumped. We're going to keep fighting. We are not deterred. We are recommitted. So, of justice, we will not turn back. Justice for George Floyd. Say his name. His name.
George Floyd's death sparked policing reforms across the US. But last week, the Trump administration announced it was ending federal oversight agreements and dropping investigations into major police departments. Jamie Salina reports from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where residents say they will choose joy over fear.
5 years after a dark day, there's also light. At the Rise of Remember Festival, the community not only recalls the pain, relentless strides, bearing hope where fear resides. April Graves, the Brooklyn Center mayor, says joy has sprouted too.
Because I really do think that love is much stronger than hate.
She says, though, lately it may feel easier to succumb to the latter, but they won't let that happen.
With some of the recent changes at the federal level and some of the rumors around potential pardons and issues around the consent decree, it's like an intentional reharming of the community, but that doesn't mean that we're going to allow it to break us.
So their strategy today, joy.
Scared, crushed, didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, I wanted to do a lot of things, but I'm gonna show up here with joy.
Former NBA player Antonia Davis and Alberta Gillespie helped lead organizations dedicated to players and their families.
We are determined to move forward. We are determined to let not the pain that was here be the last word, but joy be the last word.
At times when things happen, we have to do this. We gotta do this. We can't do the right thing.
They say there's a long road ahead for healing, but they'll walk it together. Sammy Solina, 11 News.
A trade loophole closed on Friday, and it could have a massive impact for American consumers. You see, millions of Americans say have flocked to sites like Temu and Shein, drawn in by some of these Chinese e-commerce sites, I should say, by some of those extremely low prices and a big variety of products. And that's partially because of the de minimis exemption, which allowed packages worth less than $8. That exemption actually expired on May 2nd, and prices, they have already soared on some of these sites in recent weeks. Temu, for example, they ended shipments from China to the US and only fulfilling American orders from within that country, also imposing some of these new tariffs and duties. Well, that has led to some shipping delays, and all of this is happening amid the uncertainty of Donald Trump's trade war. The U.S. had imposed a tariff of 145% on Chinese goods. That's been temporarily reduced for most goods to 30%. So what does all this mean? Let's explore all of this with exactly what this means for Chinese e-commerce platforms and American consumers that shop there. Joining us is Yao Henry Jin. He's an associate professor of supply chain management at Miami University, joining us live from Westchester, Ohio. Professor, thank you for getting up early for us.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for having me.
So we've heard some folks refer to this as a sort of tariff ceasefire agreement, this break from these tariffs. This exemption also allowed companies like Shein and Temu to really thrive until that loophole was done away with. What do you think has fueled the Trump administration's desire to go after these specific companies that are providing some pretty low-cost goods like apparel to American consumers?
Well, so for one thing, the sheer volume of these goods that have been coming across the border in recent years have really left a large portion of goods, especially in things like apparel, that are rather heavily taxed, if you will, for imports. And these have not been levied any duties on. And for the most part, consumers were benefiting from being able to pay, as to your point, lower prices, much lower than what they otherwise would have had to pay at a store like Forever 21 or some of the other fast fashion goods where retailers import in large volumes and that they do have to pay these import tariffs on. And so for Donald Trump, part of going after the de minimis is really an extension from the Biden era when our policymakers started to pay attention to say, hey, we have all of these packages coming through the border that is clogging up our customs, and a lot of times we have no way of tracing what is exactly inside these packages.
We're back with our business leader, where we talk to small business owners from coast to coast about President Trump's tariffs. Some are feeling relief from the duties. Many are feeling stress. Today, we're visiting Brick Road Coffee in
Tempe, Arizona, a coffee pastry in 2021 on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic as a way to build community. Founder and owner Gabe Hagan is joining me now. Gabe, really appreciate your time. And in addition to tariffs impacting the product you already sell, coffee, which, as we know, isn't produced in the mainland US, you're also trying to grow a business here. Talk about the overall impact of tariffs on that right now.
Yeah, so thank you, first of all, for having me on to talk about this. We started mid last year the expansion process for our business, and we have had to drastically reshift our focus over the last 6 months, especially. We've cut over $75,000 from our growth budget. That would be investment into equipment, build out costs, things like that, just so we could try to conserve some of our capital so we could weather whatever is coming our way, which we really truly don't know what that would be right now.
Have you had to raise costs on customers yet? You said you're talking about taking money from a growth budget. What about kind of day to day?
Yeah, so far, luckily, we've been able to absorb most of the impacts that we've seen because they are trickling in here and there. What we're actually experiencing the most difficulty with right now is actually product availability. We have 4 that we haven't been able to get all 4 of them back in stock over the last 3 weeks. And every week we put in orders to our distributors and our products keep becoming out of stock. So we're actually seeing more of an impact on the supply chain right now, but we're anticipating that if prices do go up when these products come back in stock, we're going to have to pass those on.
With community being so central kind of to the origin story of your business, what have you noticed in the community as kind of tariffs have become such a central point of economic uncertainty, concerns people are having?
Yeah, so we're a community hub, we're a coffee shop. It's a very easy access point for a lot of people. We have done a lot of work to build our shop as a community hub where people can come and gather. So we're still fortunate to see relatively steady foot traffic. But what we are seeing is we're seeing the amount of spend decreasing. We're seeing, maybe they're not going to grab that muffin, they're not going to grab that bag of coffee to take home with them. They're just going to grab their daily coffee, or maybe it's just once or twice a week versus 3 or 4 times. So we're still seeing the foot traffic, but our sales are still going down. And I think a lot of that comes back to just consumer uncertainty. There's a lot of people that just aren't sure what's going to happen. So everybody, just like I did with my construction budget, everybody at home is doing that same thing with their own personal finances. They're trying to cut back where they can to really weather whatever's going to come our way.
What's your durability as a business to be able to weather that over time, right? You've been able to make changes, withhold some money, focus on kind of taking back from the growth side of things, the construction side of things. How long can you do that sustainably?
Not much longer. And to be fully transparent, like the reason why we were able to do any type of growth is mid last year, I invested my entire retirement because I had a corporate career, so my 401k. I took money out on my house. So I'm at this point, all my cards are on the table. So if we aren't able to weather it, there's no more reserves for me to kind of tap into as a business owner. I don't have the ability to weather a 3 to 6 month loss while this shakes out. I really need to make sure that I'm scraping by every month. So it is a daily challenge that we have to kind of assess and really reprioritize.
What is your message to lawmakers? What would you tell them if they're listening right now?
We need stability. I mean, whether it be for at home or for in our businesses, I need to know what I can plan for. I mean, it's middle of the year, and believe it or not, we need to start planning for the holiday season. That typically means I would be putting in large, cup orders that would be really great Christmas gifts and stuff like that. I'm not doing that because I can't risk tying up that capital because of that instability. So stability is going to be the number one thing that's really needed, because when it comes to figuring out how to adjust as small businesses, not having, corporate finance departments behind us, I really have to decide whether or not I'm going to raise my prices, which ultimately impact my consumers, or I'm going to find a way to cut wages or cut hours which impacts my staff and my staff retention. So one way or the other, it's impacting my community, and it just depends on how bad it's going to be. So stability is going to be key for me planning, and most businesses planning for the remainder of the year and beyond.
Tempe, Arizona is a great town. If you're in Tempe, Arizona, Brick Road Coffee is in that town, community oriented, community centered. Gabe Hagan, we really appreciate your time and sharing your story. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Miley Cyrus suffers for her art. The performer said on Jimmy Kimmel Live she had to be hospitalized in November for a brutal infection in her kneecap after filming herself rolling around on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The shoot was for her fantasy pop opera, Something Beautiful, set to play in U.S. theaters June 12th. Her album of the same name comes out Friday.
Un réalisateur, une caméra, de la pellicule, un producteur.
Nouvelle Vague was the French new wave of art films, including Jean-Luc Godard's classic Breathless. Nouvelle Vague is also the title of Richard Linklater's new movie, which depicts the shooting of Breathless in the iconic style of that film. Love Letter to Cinema debuted at this year's Cannes Film Festival, where Deadline reports it received an 11-minute standing ovation and sold to Netflix for $4 million, the most a U.S. outlet has ever paid for a French-language film. In Hollywood, I'm David Daniel.
What's a good moment to talk? Well, this is a good moment to talk, and this is too. Make sure the young person in your life knows that they're never a bother, because youth suicide prevention can start before a crisis. Learn more at neverabother.org.
Joining us now, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of the great state of Wisconsin. Senator, thanks so much for being here. So you just heard Speaker Johnson. He said this bill is a serious attempt to address the deficit and the debt and have the economy grow. On a scale of 1 to 10, how serious do you think this House-passed legislation actually is when it comes to reining in the debt?
Well, first of all, let me say I have nothing but respect for Speaker Johnson. I understand and sympathize with the challenge he has. I have, nothing but support for what President Trump is trying to do. I love the way he's acting boldly and swiftly, decisively to fix the enormous messes left by the Biden administration. So, from my standpoint, this is a budget reconciliation process, so we ought to talk about numbers. One of my disappointments with what the House process is about, the only number we ever heard about was $1.5 trillion, which sounds like a lot, but it's only $150 billion per year. And this is put in context of the fact that in 2019, we spent $4.4 trillion. This year we'll spend over $7 trillion. $150 billion on that is basically a rounding error.
Yeah, you're talking about
we need to get serious about this. We need to establish goals. Listen, this is the weekend we honor the service and sacrifice of the finest among us. More than 1 million that died to defend this nation. I don't think they served and sacrificed to leave our children completely mortgaged, their future and their prospects diminished because of it. So we need to be responsible. The first goal of our budget reconciliation process should be to reduce the deficit. This actually increases it. But let me describe the mess. President Obama averaged about $910 billion of deficits per year. President Trump in his first 3 years averaged about 810. Then COVID hit, over $3 trillion deficit. It should have ended there. we should have immediately returned to a pre-pandemic level spending, but President Biden averaged $1.9 trillion of deficits over his 4 years. And according to CBO, those deficits now average $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years. We'll add $22 trillion. And I'm sorry, the House bill would probably add, I've calculated $4 trillion. You're saying you have these independent analysts saying it's 3.3 to 4 trillion. I agree with that. We have to reduce the deficit. And so we need to focus on spending. So what by funding it?
Right. So what changes are you going to push for in this bill when the Senate takes it up? You want to make $6 trillion in spending cuts over the next decade. You say, just for comparison, that's the equivalent of almost the entire federal budget from last year. Here's where all that money went last year. We're just holding up a chart. You already know the percentages here of how much is going to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Pentagon, and on and on. Where would you make cuts?
But first of all, you take a different approach. You don't start at $7 trillion with completely unjustified level spending and then subject yourself to death by 1,000 cuts. You start with a reasonable pre-pandemic level spending. You've heard people talk about zero-based budgeting. I'm talking about a budget of 5.5 to 6.5 trillion. Those are options from Clinton, Obama, and Trump, where you just take their actual outlays, plus them up by population growth and inflation, leaving Social Security, Medicare, and interest untouched. That would leave you somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 trillion dollars. So you start there, but you have to do the work, and you need the time to do the work. I have to believe when you go through $7,000 billion of spending, if you go by it line by line, like DOGE has done, you will find hundreds of billions of dollars, and I've proven this in terms of where the spending occurs, hundreds of billions of dollars of spending that if you eliminate, nobody would even notice it other than the grifters who are sucking down the waste, fraud, and abuse.
So President Trump has suggested.
So you got to do the work.
Yeah. President Trump has suggested that the debt is not really top of mind of his concerns. He wants Republicans to fall in line. He wants Republicans to pass the bill. You told CNN, quote, somebody's got to be the dad that says, I know y'all want to go to Disney World, but we can't. I guess I'm going to be that guy, unquote. So how determined are you to be that guy if it actually means telling President Trump you are going to vote against the bill and you're going to try to get other Republican senators to join you unless there are major changes?
In 2010, I sprang on the Tea Party movement, and as I did parades, I would shout, this is a fight for freedom. We are mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong, it's immoral, it has to stop. I haven't changed. My campaign promise in 2010 and every campaign after that was to stop mortgaging our children's future. It's immoral, it's wrong, it has to stop. And so he may not be worried about that. I am extremely worried about that. That is my primary goal running for Congress. This is our moment. We've witnessed an unprecedented level of increased spending, 58% since 2019, other than World War II. This is our only chance to reset that to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. And again, I think you can do it, and the spending that we would eliminate, people wouldn't even notice. But you have to do the work, which takes time. That's part of the process. Problem here is we've rushed this process. We haven't taken the time. We've done the same old way, exempt most programs, take a look at a couple, tweak them a little bit, try and rely on a CBO score, and then have that score completely out of context with anything that really we ought to be talking about, like the $22 trillion of additional deficit over the next 10 years.
So we're out of time, but I'm just wondering if you could just give me a number. How many other Republican senators do you think share your concerns and are willing to make major changes to this bill?
I think we have enough to stop the process until the president gets serious about the spending reduction and reducing the deficit.
Senator Ron Johnson, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a peaceful and meaningful Memorial Day.
You too.
Your house is on fire. Your house is on fire.
New York teens were on their way home from their junior prom when they saw a garage engulfed in flames. They went to the front door of the house to make sure that nobody was inside, but there was.
Your house is on fire. Your house is on fire. It's on fire. You guys gotta get out. Yo, get out. Get out. You guys.
It was prom night. We ended up leaving a little bit early to come here to One Jenny to get something to eat. And then we ended up leaving and decided to go to our friend's house. And on the way there, we saw a huge garage just engulfed in flames. And we were just astonished at what was happening. We ended up running up to the house and making sure no one was in there, and it was a really crazy night, definitely.
You know, you kind of just have to react, and we did react, and we were able to get everybody out and make sure that no other damage was done. And you know, it's like fight or flight. You just have to do it, and we didn't think twice, and glad we were there because we don't know if the family would have gotten help. We're just grateful.
The family representative is saying the two girls and the father and the dog all made it out safely because of these two remarkable young men.
Walk people through the diagnosis here. Yeah, no one likes to hear news like this, but let me talk you through it. There may be some potential treatments for him. This is something known as normal pressure hydrocephalus. Now, hydrocephalus may be a term people are familiar with. They think about water on the brain. Typically think about that happening in babies, but it can happen in adults as well. And Phil, let me show you these images here. You get an idea of what this looks like. In an adult brain, you have normal fluid-filled spaces. So on the left, that's what the brain should look like. That's normal. On the right, you can see those black areas in the middle. Phil, those are the ventricles, and they carry cerebrospinal fluid. And you can see that they're much larger in the scan on the right. That is normal pressure hydrocephalus. And so that is something that happens typically in people over the age of 65, and it can cause all sorts of different symptoms that I'm sure have led to him canceling the tour. How common is this? This is not that common, but it is one of those things, I'll tell you interestingly, just because this is my area of expertise, patients oftentimes will come in with symptoms such as difficulty with walking, balance difficulties. They may have difficulty with their bladder control. They may have difficulty with cognition. Oftentimes it is confused for things like Alzheimer's disease, for example, or even Parkinson's disease. Patient comes in like that, they get a scan, and all of a sudden they see this normal pressure hydrocephalus, which again, you don't want to get any of these diagnoses, but this is potentially a treatable problem. So it's not common, but it can be a mimic of a lot of other neuro sort of diseases out there, Phil. You mentioned area of expertise. You operate on patients with this kind of condition. Tell us about the treatment. Yeah, so it's interesting. So think about that fluid again. That fluid is circulating around the brain, around the spinal cord. First of all, you can actually take a needle and do what's called a lumbar puncture, which is a needle in the lower back, and drain some of that fluid. When you drain some of that fluid, the patient might pretty rapidly feel better, improve in their gait, improve in their walking, improve in their cognition. If that happens, and it does happen a fair number of times, then you can do something that's a bit more permanent. So this is the brain. You basically would put a catheter sort of through the brain into one of those fluid-filled spaces I mentioned, and then using a catheter sort of drain that fluid into the abdomen, for example. That's called a shunt, something else that people may have heard of. And I got to tell you, this is rare, but when it comes to someone with what Billy Joel is describing, it could potentially be a very treatable problem. I think that's what they're hoping for. I'm sure he's having those discussions with his doctors right now.
This is my new sister and brother. Brother lost his family just like you guys.
Siblings find there's something strange about their new foster mother and bring her back.
How's it going? Where's Cassidy?
I didn't.
Filmmakers Danny and Michael Filippo were excited to work with two-time Oscar nominee Sally Hawkins.
She's so different in every single film that she'd done, and the fact she'd never played like an outright horror character as well, the idea of getting her was so exciting to us. We just didn't think it would be possible though. Yeah, we didn't think she'd say yes, but the script got sent to her and she loved the script. And then so we had a call and we were just enamored by her. We thought she was incredible.
Gotta tell you a secret.
She really went there. She was terrifying to approach even on set. Like she was just so in the character and in the zone. Yeah, and we purposely structured the film when we were shooting it for it to be in order. So we knew those big scenes were coming and it was building. It was always exciting the night before because you knew Sally was going to bring it.
So listen. Some people believe spirit stays in the body for months after death. We can bring it back.
In Hollywood, I'm David Daniel.
Since Garcia, You're a school counselor and new homeowner and grad student. You're an AMDR. National University supports the whole you, so you can focus on what matters most. National University, supporting the whole you. UNICEF spokesperson Tess Ingram joins me now to speak about the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza. She is in Amman, Jordan. Appreciate you joining us. Good to see you. So an 11-week Israeli blockade has ended, but only a very small amount of humanitarian aid has actually crossed the border into Gaza. What is the situation in the enclave right now for millions of starving Palestinians?
That's right. A handful of trucks is not enough to end the suffering of people in Gaza after almost 20 months of war and this blockade, which has stopped, aid entirely for 11 weeks. This trickle of aid is important. We've, as UNICEF, have managed to get hundreds of pallets of nutrition supplies in, but we need to see it continue and we need to see it scale up because the situation is really dire. We are seeing malnourished children, the number of those rising. We're seeing children dying because of malnutrition. And of course, the bombardments continue. People are being displaced. People are dying. And in the past, in 72 hours over this weekend, we saw reports of a number of children killed, including 9 siblings from the same family as they were in their home. And then again yesterday, reports of 18 children killed after an attack on a school. So it's relentless, Rose, from all angles, from both the blockade and the bombs.
And Tess, while residents in Gaza try to find whatever food they can to survive, Israel's military is issuing new evacuation orders, warning it will carry out an unprecedented attack in southern Gaza. Palestinians are being ordered to relocate to a narrow strip of land along the Mediterranean Sea. How will more than 2 million exhausted and starving Palestinians live and survive in this small area of land?
That's the million-dollar question, and we are urging for civilians not to be forcibly displaced. The amount of reasonable living conditions, living area in the Gaza Strip has been reduced because of the enormous amount of destruction that we've seen in the Gaza Strip. I've been there several times throughout the conflict and seen firsthand people living in and among the rubble of shelled out buildings, living in makeshift shelters under pieces of plastic. The options are limited. And so then to force 2 million people into an area that's only a very small sliver of the Gaza Strip with no guarantee of safety, that's abhorrent. And it's abhorrent for 2 reasons. One, because there's that lack of safety. We've seen over and over again that even in so-called safe places, the bombs continue. But it's also abhorrent, Rose, because there's no guarantee of safety of supplies in those places. There's still limited access to safe water, a real lack of food, a lack of medicine and access to healthcare. So these are not safe places for people, as you say, after almost 20 months of war where people are exhausted, they're delusional, they're fatigued, they just want this to end. I spoke to one mother this week and I asked her how she was and she said, I'm alive. I'm not okay, but I'm alive. And that's the standard for people in Gaza at the moment, is just hanging on.
And Tess, according to an Israeli military official, this evacuation order includes plans to occupy and hold